would say that I made two profoundly important decisions for me in my career. And I'm putting aside my decision to go into cancer medicine and research because they were obviously foundational for me and for everyone else elected to the academy, I assume. The first was early in my career. I was a clinical investigator and I was starting a lab. And I had an opportunity to make a decision between developing for clinical trials a new antibody that was conventionally structured, a regular old IgG molecule that looked like it had some promising preclinical data and might have been worthwhile, and this newfangled kind of construct called a bispecific antibody, where the antibody would have two binding domains, one attaching to a cancer target and the other to an activating molecule expressed on the surface of killer cells of the immune system. And I had to make a decision. I was in a big meeting with a lot of people, including all of my bosses. And I had to make a decision about which one I would prefer. And not knowing what my bosses would have preferred, I decided I would just do what sang to me. And I decided I would rather take the chance on something new and different and potentially important rather than go with something that might create a somewhat linear advance. And it worked out. I ended up being one of the first people ever to develop bispecific monoclonal antibodies and take them into the clinic. I became well known for that. And it provided a foundation for the scientific career that followed. And so the lesson I learned from that was really important. And that lesson is that you should always be curious. You should always have a little bit of courage. And you should always go where your instincts and your best intellectual hunch carry you. And you shouldn't be afraid of failure, because there was a non-zero chance that I was going to make that decision to go with bispecifics, and they'd be on the ash heap of cancer research history very quickly. Well, as it turns out, we were in the first wave of what has ultimately become a very successful endeavor. So that was really important for my career, and it really taught me some lessons that I've tried to carry through in my career since then. I think the second was a very painful decision that I made about 20 years ago. I was rising in what I like to call the oncocracy, at my institution and national levels, and I found that I enjoyed the challenges of leadership and the opportunities and the ability to serve others to make things better where I worked and perhaps at the national level. I was doing that while still trying to have an active clinical practice, to see patients, but also to conduct and run clinical trials and be active in the clinical trial cooperative groups, and of course to run my research laboratory. And I was at a meeting out in California, and I took myself on a long walk because I knew I couldn't sustain everything. And I took this long walk all by myself, and it was by the ocean, so it was a very evocative setting, I guess. And I began thinking through really rather deeply, what is it that I wanted to be when I grew up? And of course, by then I was already a grown-up. And I said, I can't do everything. And I made the very painful decision at that moment to back off from being a clinical trial principal investigator and to focus on those other elements that I thought were important. And there isn't a day that goes by that I'm not glad that I made a decision to narrow my focus. And at the same time, there isn't a day that goes by when I don't regret the decision, because I loved what I was doing in the clinical trial space. And I think the lesson I learned from that is sometimes you have to make difficult choices in order to be able to move forward. And so those were two of the critical decision points for me. And I guess the final thing was that I was very fortunate to be earlier in my career at an institution, Fox Chase Cancer Center at that time, where there were some towering figures who served as role models and as icons who I aspired to be like, people like Al Knudsen and Beatrice Mintz and folks like that, legendary scientists. And they were much more basic investigators than I ever was going to be. But I was inspired by their example and by the rigor and clarity of their thinking and by their insistence on excellence in everything they did. And I believe that one of the most important conversations I ever had was with Al Knudsen, who should have won the Nobel Prize for his two-hit hypothesis, when he said over and over again, actually, whenever we would have conversations about people's work, he would ask, but is it important? And he was really asking whether the problem being addressed was really important. And I have always carried that with me and always tried to make sure that in the work I do and in the work that I evaluate, that we strive for doing stuff that matters, that has impact. And that's been very powerful for me. I think the next generation has some unique challenges and opportunities. The challenges are related to the scarcity of funding, the lethal indifference of the peer review system, even for getting papers published these days, and for the really hard work that has to be done in order to be successful. But that's counterbalanced by some extraordinary opportunities. I think we're in an era, in an environment unlike any other in human history when it comes to the field of investigative cancer research science. I think that it will be the privilege of the next generation, and I think they will rise to the challenge and the opportunity to move the ball down the field closer to the goal line. I think that we have an unprecedented array of tools and opportunities, and it's up to the next generation to be able to look back on what we did in my generation and say, well, I guess they were okay, but they didn't understand this, they didn't understand that. How could they not have understood this is what you have to do? And I look forward to that. I hope I'm around to see some of that happen down the road. I think that the advice I would give people is, one, get an idea that you care about, a research concept that you really care about. Make sure you're able to explain it to your 6-year-old child or nephew or niece. Make sure that you have a clarity of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. Recognize that the road to achieving the goals you set out is not linear. Expect detours, expect roadblocks, expect the need to sometimes dynamite those roadblocks or get around them or wait until they clear. Be persistent, be patient. Don't give up. Jim Valvano in his famous ESPN ESPYs speech said, don't ever give up. That doesn't just apply to patients, it also applies to scientists. And I think it's really important that our next generation of scientists be motivated and empowered by the mission of reducing human suffering by cancer, and that they have the perseverance to continue doing it, and that they be driven by continuous and insatiable curiosity, not only to achieve the mission, but also to find a way to explore new avenues, new directions, ask that what if question, and see what happens. Nothing in my career has turned out the way I expected it to when it was good. And it's serendipity to some degree, but serendipity comes as the result of insatiable curiosity, willingness to try, the courage to fail, and the strength to learn from failure. This is really one of the best and most important honors I've ever received. I've been very fortunate in my career to enjoy success and to feel like I've made an impact on the world. I went into the field of medicine hoping I would be able to have an impact. I went into the field of medical research hoping that my impact would extend beyond that which I can make one patient at a time. And having had the privilege of being involved at the beginning of the antibody therapy revolution and made some contributions to it, I've always had the personal satisfaction of knowing that I have made a difference. It's always nice, though, to get some external validation that the work you've done mattered and that other people appreciate that the work that you've done is important. And to get this award basically from my peers is the highest form of honor that I can imagine. And I'm really grateful to SITC for providing me with this remarkable recognition. And I hope that I have actually lived up to the honor that's being bestowed. And I hope that with a little bit of luck, I will continue to honor my induction by doing good work in the future and continuing to make a difference.